Kia ora, my name is Jess. I'm in the External Communications team here at the FMA. Today I am joined with Stuart Johnson, our Chief Economist. So today we're going to talk a little bit about contributions. So I'm going to throw to you, my first question is, how much should you contribute to your KiwiSaver?
All right, so contributions. Contributions are a little bit tricky, but there are some good rules of thumb that can really help people think about the appropriate contribution rate. So when we're thinking about how much you should contribute to your KiwiSaver, there's two ways of thinking this through. The first one is to ask yourself, how much money do you think you'll need in retirement?
How do you answer that question?
It's a tough question. Jess, if I remember rightly, you're about 27?
Yes.
So you're a long way away from...
25.
All right. This growing younger works for me. You can be 25. So keeping the math simple, you're a long way from retirement, a good 40 years.
Yep.
So it's really hard to know how much money you're going to need when you actually retire in 40 years' time. Your life's going to have all different sorts of things. Investment returns are going to have all sorts of different things. So it's really hard to tell. In your 20s and your 30s, and perhaps even in the first half of your 40s, an easier way to think about this is to think about how much you can afford to contribute to your KiwiSaver. So thinking a little bit more about your present financial circumstances and how much you think you can put away for your retirement, rather than focusing on the much more difficult question of how much you will need in 40 or 50 or 60 years' time. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm still curious to know how much you think I should be contributing right now, because I'm not going to lie, I haven't looked at it recently or changed my contributions. Full disclaimer.
That's okay. Answering the question of how much I can afford to contribute is easier, but certainly not easy. So when we're talking to people about their whole financial circumstances, we'd encourage people to think about having some money set aside for a rainy day. I'm sure you've heard the term a rainy day fund.
Yeah.
You know, in case something happens, your car breaks down or you need a new car or you lose your job or something of that nature. The other thing to consider is that you can only contribute certain amounts to KiwiSaver, and that's going to feature in this conversation as well.
Yeah, so what are those certain amounts?
For sure, that's a really good question. So you can contribute as the employee either 3, 4, 6, 8 or 10% of your income. Now, do you know how much you're contributing now?
No.
For sure.
Maybe in the default. Is there a default?
There is a default. When people go into KiwiSaver, most of the time they start contributing 3%, which is the minimum.
Yep.
So if you haven't done anything, probably 3% is where you are. And honestly, that's a good place to start. But over the course of your life, we'd hope to see that increasing. So when you've got a little bit more money, hopefully a bit more disposable income, you're being paid a little bit more, you're probably saving more into your discretionary savings account. But at the same time, increasing the amount that you're putting into your KiwiSaver is also really good.
So if I'm, let's say, putting in that 3% right now, and I haven't honestly thought about changing it, when in my life should I think about changing it? So like, let's say, you know, you have kids, you buy a house, things like that. Is it certain life stages that you'd recommend people should maybe look at it, or?
That's actually a really great answer. That's certainly half of it. We call them life events.
Yes.
So every time you have a life event, looking at your whole finances, including how much you're putting into your KiwiSaver, would be really good. I would also sort of encourage people to do it once a year.
Okay.
Having a look at your KiwiSaver, looking at your annual statement, looking at how much money is in your other savings accounts, thinking about any debt, maybe debt we should be looking at a bit more regularly than once a year. But certainly checking in properly with your finances every year is a really good idea.
I need to do that.
We all do.
I'll go away and do that after this. So another question on that I was just thinking right now is, when you get a new job, is that also a good time to think about it? Like if you get a pay increase or decrease, like stuff happens, is that a good situation to kind of relook at your KiwiSaver and your contributions?
Absolutely. We would think of all of that as a life event. An increase in your salary, definitely. A decrease in your salary, unfortunately, it does happen.
So is it beneficial to stay with the same contribution if you can avoid like chopping and changing? Or can you change as many times as you want, really? Or what is there consequences to that?
Not really. Honestly, you can change as much as you want.
So how do the employer contributions work in comparison with your personal contributions?
It's a great question. So just like your contributions are a percentage of your salary, your employer's contributions are also calculated as a percentage of your salary. And so for many employees, their employer contributes 3%. Some places contribute 4%, others up to 7 or even 9%. But the typical would be 3%. It can be a little bit confusing because it's 3% for the employee and 3% for the employer, and that is a little bit confusing. But it's basically calculated exactly the same way. To be really honest, as long as that money is flowing into your KiwiSaver, you don't really need to worry about it. That should happen without you doing anything. And it's great that your firm or your employer is contributing, but there's not much action required from you.
Yeah. And so for someone who's just starting out, we did talk a little bit about the default, but I'm just curious to go into that a little bit more. So when they get their first job at 18, you're automatically contributing 3%? Is that how it works?
When you first get a job that's eligible for KiwiSaver, there are some income de minimis. That's another silly economics word that means lower bound.
What does that mean? I don't jargon to me, Stuart.
Yes,
So
I'm sorry. I mean de minimis. We could do away with that. Once the KiwiSaver, your first KiwiSaver is opened up, you will be placed into a default fund, and unless you make a change, your contribution rate will be 3%.
So, Stuart, what are the benefits if you contribute more than the minimum 3%?
So, Jess, are you a good saver?
Yes.
Right, excellent. I can tell you being a good saver...
I like to think I am.
Well, I'm sure you are. Absolutely being a good saver will set you up for your financial future. If you're a really good saver, you have to think about whether it's appropriate to contribute more to KiwiSaver. So let me explain what I mean. If you're a really good saver and you're able to save money and you're able to put that money away and not use it for a new outfit or an emergency holiday, that's really good. So if you put more money into your KiwiSaver, you won't be able to access that money, perhaps say in an emergency.
Yeah.
So you have to think about, if I'm a really good saver, there might not be much of an incentive for you to put more money into KiwiSaver, because if you put it into another savings product, you will have better access to that money.
Gotcha.
However, if you'd have said, oh, Stuart, I really struggle to save, well, then I would really have encouraged you to put more money into your KiwiSaver.
Because you can't access it.
Because you can't access it. That's exactly correct. So it's a good example of how different situations are the right answer for different people.
So there's a lot of information you dumped on me today, and I'm getting a better handle on KiwiSaver. But could you just nicely summarise with a little bow on top what you explained to me today about contributions?
Absolutely. So, Jess, because you're in your 20s, but honestly, for anybody sort of in their 20s or their 30s or their 40s, let's say, they should think about how much they can afford to contribute to KiwiSaver. So that's probably thinking about things like, do I have an emergency or a rainy day fund? Am I contributing some money to a different savings account? So if somebody's able to put some money into each of those different savings-related goals, then that would be really good. The exact amount that you are putting into your KiwiSaver is probably a function of trying to keep some balance amongst those different savings goals.
Okay.
You've got to put in from the employee, that's your contribution, it's got to be 3, 4, 6, 8 or 10%. If you're a good saver, maybe towards the bottom of that and putting some money into a different savings product. If you really struggle to save, might be a good reason to put some more money into KiwiSaver.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you'd like more information, head to our website www.fma.govt.nz. We'll see you next time.